We are going to listen to Sam Pitroda over the next 45 minutes or so. He is going to take us through what his view of the challenges are as far as the public health emergency and the pandemic that we are seeing. His unique and rather scaled up solutions on what we can do to fight this, and most importantly, Sam Pitroda's point on how technology can be used in a pandemic world and a post-pandemic world. This is the looking glass that only somebody like Sam Pitroda can lead us through, and therefore may I turn this over to our august speaker today. May I request all of you who are on this Zoom call to mute your microphones till he finishes his talk. Keep your questions ready, put them on the chat window. I will be taking note of all the questions, and we will try and ensure that every possible question that you ask is forwarded to Sam Pitroda. So with this request to all of you to keep yourself muted and alive and keep your fingers alive on the chat window, may I turn it over to Sam Pitroda for the next 45 minutes. So we are all agog. We are all very interested in what you're going to tell us. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Amirullah Khan. Thank you for very generous introduction and comments. Dr. Muhammad Mansoor Alam, Chairman, Institute of Objective Studies. Professor Z.M. Khan, Secretary General of the Institute. And once again, Dr. Amirullah Khan, Research Director. Greetings from Chicago to all of you, dignitaries, friends, professionals, and all of you who have joined us for this event. It is early morning in Chicago, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you all. I especially want to thank Dr. Muhammad Mansoor Alam for following up on this and giving me this opportunity. I would like to talk about COVID-19, its impact on all of us, and what does it really mean in a hyper-connected world. To me, for the first time in the human history, we are all connected. Never happened before. To me, this is a bigger invention than language, which was about so-called 15,000 years ago. To me, it is as big as fire, but I don't think we understand the implication of hyperconnectivity. I remember, as Dr. Alam reminded us, that it was very difficult to get telephone connection in India, which wasn't too long ago. 30 years ago, we had just about 2 million telephones to connect 650 million people in India. It used to take 10 years to get a telephone. From there, today we are at a point where we have 1.2 billion phones. India is essentially all connected. Of course, there are pockets where connectivity is difficult, but for all practical purpose, the world is connected, not only with telephone, but with internet and hyperconnectivity. So I want to focus more on the meaning of hyperconnectivity and how does it affect human civilization and India going forward. Corona crisis has put this world to halt, on pause. No one ever thought that one little virus originated somewhere in the remote part of the world could really create havoc and essentially put everybody on pause. It has given us time to rethink and evaluate and really understand all of that we have done in the past. Today, economies are in trouble. Education is in question. Health services are being challenged. Governments are looking for ways and means to get back to normal. And poor people are suffering the most because they live on day-to-day income. There is no work. Economic activities are on the back burner because everyone is worrying about their health and survival. Health systems are overstretched, and we really don't have still good answers. Everyone is hoping for the best, but things are getting out of control. I don't see vaccine coming in a short period of time that can reach out to large number of people. And the only alternative right now is to take extra precautions. You almost have to be paranoid to survive today. Just to give you my example, I haven't left my home for 7 months. The maximum distance I travel is my mailbox. And it's a new normal for me. But I get a lot more done thanks to hyperconnectivity. I can connect to the rest of the world. I see my grandchildren in California every day on Zoom. And I have learned to live with this new tools and technology to accomplish my objectives. Corona crisis has taught 2 basic lessons to me. One, that we are all connected, irrespective of our race, religion, country of origin, young, old, rural, urban, educated, uneducated, rich or poor. This little virus can affect every one of us. What it means is that as part of a biological system, we cannot isolate ourselves. And we must learn to take care of our planet first. Planet is the most important thing for our survival. We need planet. Planet doesn't need us. There are other life forms that will survive if we don't survive. Second lesson for me is that at the end of the day, people matter. Nothing else matters. Again, irrespective of who we are, what we believe in, what we look like, we all matter. Every life is important. So these 2 fundamental lessons should help us in charting out our future. While corona crisis is going on or has been going on, I see world over for the last several years, rise of populist, rise of nationalism, rise of people who divide societies, whether it is true in America or in India or in other parts of the world, Brazil, Turkey, Philippines, Hungary, you name it. I believe this has to do with hyperconnectivity. Because hyperconnectivity says there are no differences. And this is a knee-jerk reaction, saying, oh my God, we are all going to be equal? How do I react to it? I react to it by focusing on devising ways and means of separating people. So knowing that COVID-19 has reminded us to focus on planet and people, let's go back for a minute to hyperconnectivity. Hyperconnectivity brings about three main things. One, democratization. Connectivity democratizes everything. It democratizes knowledge. It democratizes access, such that a poor little kid in Bihar can go visit Paris, London, see the world. That little window on the screen is not a computer. It's a window to the world. To look at different art, different culture, different religions, different practices, different food, different songs, and understand and enjoy the diversity this world has. So democratization also implies empowering human being. It gives me tools that I never had before. I can really use this little device on my hand as a way to reach out to the world. So democratization of information, knowledge, individual is a very powerful part of hyperconnectivity. Second key part of hyperconnectivity is decentralization. Everything is being decentralized through this. I don't need to really look at the old model of centralized economy, centralized education, centralized power, centralized everything. Because if you look at the organizational architecture of the past, it is predominantly based on command and control. It is based on centralization. And people have always focused on top-down development as opposed to bottom-up. So decentralization is another important aspect of hyperconnectivity that we must understand, appreciate, and implement in the future. And the third, which is very important, but not well understood, is demonetization. Hyperconnectivity is demonetizing everything. Take, for example, transportation. When Uber ride came on the scene, a lot of people realized that they don't need to own a car. They can call in urban areas, transport using this little device, and the expense to own a car, insurance, driver's license, all that can be eliminated. Same with Airbnb. So a lot of these economies are being demonetized. Take for example, banking. And I have seen it all in the last 55 years that I have spent on connectivity. Earlier, banks were computerized in the back to make sure that the general ledger and all is automated. Then banks got into teller to decentralize. Then banks got into ATM, so people can go get money anywhere. And now money is on this device. What it means is banking has been demonetized. To start a bank, I don't need fancy buildings, high-powered staff. Lot of these things are going to be demonetized to a point. The value will change. Take, for example, education. Today, education is centralized. You go to school, university, teachers get on blackboard and give you lecture, give you homework, you come home, sit with 400 kids. That model doesn't work anymore. And then you pay $200,000 to get an MBA or 5 lakh rupees to get an MBA. In a demonetized education system, I'll be able to learn what I want to learn online. I won't have to pay all the tuition. I may not get the right certificate. But that certificate is important today. It will not be important tomorrow. Today we give certificate to exit. We really need certificate to enter. Now these are different concepts. Who decided it should take 4 years to get a degree? But the whole world takes 4 years to get a degree. Who decided it to take two years to get a master's? With democratization of information, all I need to learn are 3 things. 1, motivation. If I am motivated to learn something, nobody can stop me. 2, time. I need to devote time to learn what needs to be learned. And 3, content. Content is already available by best of the best in the world on internet. What I really need is a mentor who would teach me how to navigate through this information. What is good, what is bad, what is useful, what is not very useful. Unfortunately, teachers today are not trained to be mentors. They're only trained to be teachers who deliver lectures. So I don't need to go to school or college to listen to lecture. I can listen to lecture at home. But I need to go to meet with other people to do my homework. So I almost have to flip my classroom. What I learn in class, I need to learn at home. What I do at home, I need to do in class. That is the power of hyperconnectivity. It can demonetize education completely. It can demonetize health services. Today, if I have a health issue, I get an appointment with doctor. I drive 30 minutes to go to his place, wait there for an hour, sometimes hour and a half, get a 5-minute appointment. He checks me out and I leave. What a waste of time and energy. I can use this to schedule an appointment, get on video, talk to him, and if necessary, go see him. So in a sense, when I look at the hyperconnectivity of today, I find that everything we do today is basically obsolete. Everything. You start with that. What it means is that the things we designed in the past were designed for unconnected world, where people are all over, far distance. How do you connect them at one place? So they come there, they do something. If we were to design the world today with hyperconnectivity, everything would be different. The way you apply for your admission would be different. The way you apply for your birth certificate would be different. I see a whole new world because of hyperconnectivity. We need to start fresh because a lot of things we have developed in the past are not fixable. Because it assumes that we are all not connected. It assumes that we need to centralize everything. The hyperconnectivity says 3 new principles: democratization, decentralization, demonetization. This has huge implications on our world. So when people talk about getting back to normal after COVID-19, can you hear me?
Sir, loud and clear, sir. Loud and clear. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So when we talk of going back to normal after COVID-19, we are trying to go back to what it was. And I'm saying that will never happen. We got to create a new world which doesn't exist today. We got to create a world which is in tune with the hyperconnectivity. What is that world? To me, that world is very similar to the world that Gandhiji had dreamed of. Unfortunately, there was no hyperconnectivity then. Hyperconnectivity says we got to promote democracy because everyone is going to be empowered. And there is no way out. Because things are decentralized, knowledge is decentralized, institutions are going to be decentralized. So there is no way you can get away from ultimately empowering human being. And empowering human being imply further extension of democracy. Democracy has to be pushed down from nation to state to district to people. 2, along with democracy will come freedom. Along with freedom will come respect for diversity, inclusion. Ultimately, truth will prevail. Today, hyperconnectivity is used to promote lies. Hyperconnectivity is used to manipulate things. But in the long run, truth and trust will prevail. We are going through a very bad phase right now. But that, I believe, will be over. It may be 5 years, it may be 10 years. So hyperconnectivity to me imply democracy, decentralization, demonetization, freedom, human rights. It implies diversity, inclusion, truth, trust. Now, these are the core principles of the civilization. If we want every human being to be empowered, we got to have democratic values. Everyone is equal. Everyone has potential. Give them an opportunity, give them respect, give them environment. And I think hyperconnectivity will force us in that direction, even though there are roadblocks for the time being. World over, as I said earlier, there is rise of populist. But I don't think that's going to last for too long, personally. Maybe it's a wishful thinking on my part as a technocrat. But I see rise of technology. And it is not just the hyperconnectivity. It is also technology related to biotech, nanotech, materials. All of the other things are going to create a whole new world. For example, there was time when people thought world will not be able to feed 7, 8 billion people. In fact, when I was in college, people talked about India being a basket case. India will not be able to feed so many people. Today, with 1.3 billion people, India has surplus food. So I think technology is going to allow us to improve productivity, efficiency, and bring a lot of these services at very low cost. When we look at the use of big data, analytics, machine learning, all that, you see the impact of these new technologies on production. And sometimes people worry about jobs. But I believe job will have different meaning. We will not have 40 hours a week job. We will not have pension. We will not have regular security. Because jobs are also going to be decentralized, demonetized. But the values are going to go down so much that you may not have to work for 40 hours a week to live comfortably. You'll have more time to explore each other. You'll have more time to engage with people. And 50 years from now, we would be wondering as to how we lived in 2020 or in 20th century. Working 40 hours a week just to eat. That phase is going to be over. Technology is going to make sure that you will have enough. In fact, today we live in an era of surplus as opposed to era of scarcity. We can produce anything, but we wind up producing wrong things because best brains in the world are busy solving problems of the rich who do not have problems to solve. And as a result, problems of the poor don't get the right attention. So we wind up producing for people who want and not for people who need. I mean, these are wild ideas. We have technology to produce for people who need. And that was the idea behind minimum income. That was the idea behind NREGA. And economists thought this will affect our budget. So we need new economy. We need new ideas in economy. So that brings me to my last point, and that is the world we live in was designed 75 years ago, just about the time I was born. I was born in 1942 in British Raj, and I have had the opportunity to see a lot of it in the last 75 years. I've seen rise of technology from vacuum tube to transistors to microprocessors to all these fancy instruments. I have seen democracy, and I've been lucky to see it on both sides of the universe. I've seen Indian democracy, I've seen American democracy. I've lived in poverty, I've lived in richness. And I have been lucky to have a different perspective. And when I look at the world at the end of my sort of tenure, I see that the world was last designed after World War II, predominantly by US. That design gave birth to UN, World Bank, IMF, NATO, WTO, and that design also created GDP, GNP, per capita income, balance of payment, trade deficit. That design served us well for many years. That design avoided war, assured peace to some extent. That design provided growth, prosperity to large number of people, and that design also gave democracy a stronger foothold. But that design is obsolete now. In last 75 years, we have not created even one new global institution of the type of UN, World Bank, IMF. In 75 years, we have basically focused on 5 fundamentals on which the design was built: democracy, human rights, capitalism, consumption, and military. Those were the 5 major foundations of the last design. Now we have gotten to a point where we need a new design. We need a design that is in tune with hyper-connected world. We need a design that is more in tune with the needs of the planet and needs of the people. We need a design that eliminates a lot of the inequality. Today, a handful of people control most of the wealth in the world. Today, there is huge amount of inequality. Today, there are discriminations based on race, religion, color, caste. And hyperconnectivity says, hey, wait a minute, everybody is connected. Corona crisis reminds us that everybody is equal. So how do we create a new design? And I've been working on it, thinking about it, just finishing a book. First draft is just about ready. And there are a lot of ideas, not that I have answers, but I think this requires global debate, discussion, that the design of this war era, World War II era, which was conceived 75 years ago, is obsolete. We need a new design of the world. And that design today is seen in terms of American vision or Chinese vision. Both of these visions are based on command and control. Both of these visions are based on hierarchical structure. Both of these visions are based on old values. You need a third vision of the world. And that third vision of the world has to be based on hyperconnectivity. That third vision has to be based on cultural, national platforms. It cannot be unipolar world. It cannot be bipolar world. It has to be multipolar world, where networks play important role and not one node. Today it's all hierarchical. Hyperconnectivity also breaks organizations. It creates flat organizational architecture. It networks people. And the lesson from hyperconnectivity for development is about decentralization, is about the fact that small is beautiful, is about the fact that you don't need to have one mega factory to scale. You can have a lot of little things, network them to scale. Because at the end of the day, we need affordability, scalability, and sustainability. Hyperconnectivity will provide us all three. We can't go back to what it was. Going back to what it was is not going to deliver results. So COVID-19 is an opportunity to redesign our governance, our priorities, our structures, our leadership, our institutions, our infrastructure, and most important of all, our mindset. We must change our mind to say everybody is equal. Everybody has right to freedom. Everybody has right to liberty. Everybody has right to follow their own path. And diversity needs to be celebrated. And this segmentation of people has to stop. Each individual is as important as anybody else. So decentralization has to be pushed all the way to individual. And this will require new thinking. The design of the past, which was conceived 75 years ago, is basically obsolete. But no one is interested in challenging that design. Because when you challenge that design, you are challenging the power, global power. But today is the time to realize that global power cannot be centralized. Global power has to be network-based, because that's what hyperconnectivity is all about. Global power has to be shared. Global power has to have two most important things in mind: planet and people. Planet imply global warming, taking care of our forest. I always ask this question: whose forests are Amazon jungles? Are these Brazilians or are these World Heritage? Is Himalaya only Indian or it is World Heritage? Just because we sit there doesn't make it ours, because it has impact on the whole world. When somebody cuts Amazon jungle, not only Brazilians should worry, we should worry too, sitting in India, because that will change the entire ecosystem. Look at the way some of our species are extincting. It's a great concern to all of us. What happens if there are no bees in this world? It will affect everybody. And it is time to now look at planet as one entity, where everyone should be concerned about monsoons and jungles and rivers and pollution and air. And basic needs of the people have to be met first, because people are the most important part of this equation. And we do live in an economy of surplus, and we can provide all basic needs without really disturbing too much. But that requires completely new design. That requires rethinking about what does economy mean? How do you value money? What is money? How money came about? What does GDP mean? GDP was a gross estimate. GDP does not take into consideration asset of a nation. I'll give you one simple example. In Rajiv Gandhi's time, we didn't have that much foreign exchange. And when VP Singh came in, we were basically broke. So one of the international trade representative from US had come, and then I was promoting indigenous development, Indian talent, local manufacturing, local production, all of the things that are today fashionable. We practiced that then in C-DOT and all. So this domain expert says, Mr. Pitroda, you are broke. India has very little foreign exchange reserve, and you can't even pay for 10 weeks of import. I'm not an economist. I don't understand a lot of these complexities. But as a layman, I asked him, I said, how can you say India is broke? If I have Taj Mahal and Madurai temple and so many other things, how can you say I'm broke? What about if I want to sell my Taj Mahal? What about if I want to sell the gold in the temples? Where do you have that on the balance sheet? Whose balance sheet is that on? So don't judge me based on production of today. Judge me based on my asset, human resource, art, culture. Where do you value all these? The economics of today doesn't value a lot of these things. And maybe these are the questions we need to ask when we think of redesigning the world. I don't have the answers, but I'm posing a question saying 75-year-old design does not work in a hyper-connected world. So let me summarize by saying it is time for all of us to deeply think about where we are, to deeply think about what is happening to our world and how hyperconnectivity will change our future. Change each one of us, change our families, our interactions, our work, our education, our health, our governance. And what do? Do we just sit there and watch? Or we raise our voice and have courage to speak up and say, hey, this is not acceptable. We got to bring democracy back in every part of the world in one form or the other. We got to empower people. We got to decentralize things. We got to look at localization. We got to look at private entrepreneurship. We got to network organization, institutions, and individuals. And we got to create a whole new world. COVID-19 gives us an opportunity to take a pause. And we can't allow us to waste this opportunity. This is once in a lifetime opportunity. This may not come for another few hundred years. And if we think of saying, okay, let's quickly go back to what it was, we will really lose this window of opportunity that has been created by the nature. We all must recognize that at the end of the day, planet and people matter. Everything we do must respect these two things. First planet, then people, because survival of planet is important for survival of people. And when we talk about people, we talk about everybody, irrespective of who they are, where they are, what they look like, or what they practice. This is a big challenge. It requires big heart. It requires open mind. It requires new thinking. And it requires willingness to change. And I find that many people are not willing to change. They want everybody else to change. They don't want to change. The change has to come from within. Each one of us will have to change to respond to this new reality. And this new reality is right in front of us. And there is no way to walk away from it. I can go on and on, but I would rather stop here. And once again, thank you all. Thank Dr. Mansoor Alam, Dr. Amir, Dr. Khan for giving me this opportunity. And I hope we can open up for a little bit of conversation. I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert at anything. I'm telling you really sincerely, and I believe that. I'm just an individual who just came from nowhere and got lucky. You know, I was born in a small little tribal village in Orissa. My father had 4th grade education. My father had no skills of any kind. I have 5 sisters and 3 brothers. I was the first one to graduate from college, ever, in entire family. I came here, got one by one all the family members. My parents came here, they died here, and we live here. I have a huge family. I have nobody in India anymore. And in addition, I had 2 heart attacks, quadruple bypasses. I had cancer. But I've been lucky. And at the tail end of my career, I'm thinking about all these things. And that's where I think that we all need to have the courage to redesign the world. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. This is by far the most inspirational and the most comprehensive talk that we have heard just about from anyone, and particularly in these times. I don't know, I'm sure you wouldn't realize this, but this is so very heartwarming to hear somebody talk with such positivity and with such optimism in amidst all this grimness and the bleak situation that we have across the world, and particularly in India. We are in a grim situation in India for a number of reasons, COVID being one of them. And to hear you present to us the fact that actually this is an opportunity, and the point that you make that this is an opportunity that won't come for the next couple of 100 years is such an important point for all of us to take back home. I'm sure everybody who's been listening to Sam has at least admired the way in which an engineer and an inventor's minds work. That it brings together everything from a 50-year journey into talking about a problem that most of us are left baffled with, into telling us that here are these few issues that are important. It is people first. People are important. I mean, that's such a major, simple point that most of our policymakers fail to understand, that it is people first. Then look at what was underlined through the conversation. The conversation was not about hyperconnectivity. He just assumed hyperconnectivity and said that what we need to use hyperconnectivity to do is to develop solutions, is to work under all the D's that Sam talked about. Thanks so much for underlining them. Democracy, diversity, decentralization, demonetization. You know what was so nice to me, to us economists who have always used demonetization as a bad word, today it was being used in such a positive context, and to show us how health can be demonetized, how education can be demonetized. This entire burden that we have of being financially well off, to be literate and to have access to health can be solved with just this simple medium that we have of hyperconnectivity. I took back several lessons, and I cannot thank Sam Pitroda enough for giving all that in this neat 45-minute module. We have a number of questions, Dr. Pitroda. You know, when I say Dr. Pitroda, I'm talking to a doctor who has about 100 doctorates, right? So, yeah, so I should just stick to Sam, right?
Just Sam. Don't
yeah. I know someone with so many honorary doctorates with 100 patents. I haven't met anybody who has that many patents. But let's talk to the intellectual. Let's talk to this public intellectual who's coming and offering to us these solutions and giving to us a heartwarming view of what the future can be and what the potential is. So Sam, I have just among the number of questions that we have, I'm just going to give you the first few, and then we will see how very many we can get in. The first question really is about India and the US, and because you have you're there, you've been watching the US very closely, and you have this real patriotic interest in India. I wish every foreigner or every NRI be like Sam, who has nobody left in India, as he said, but look at the amount of contribution he has made to this country, positive contribution, rather than much of the hatred that seems to come from outside. Here is somebody who sits out there and solves India's problems using his technological genius. But Sam, the question is that how do you look at India and the US? The US with its abundance of wealth, with its vast fiscal resources of taxes and whatever. And India, which as you said, goes broke once in a while and right now appears quite broke. How do you see us tackle these issues? And I must thank Nabiha for asking this question. Post-COVID and during COVID, how do we deal with different kinds of wealth that the countries have?
US has been very lucky and they have worked very hard in the past. They have 1/4 of our population and 3 times our land.
Yeah.
Compared to India.
Yeah.
In addition, they have the best of the best talent from all over the world that has come here, mainly because of emphasis on democracy, freedom, human rights, respect for diversity, liberty, and to live American dream of your own to flourish. So America is in a very unique position. Infrastructure is built, institutions work, it is a global power. So I don't think we should really compare in that sense. But America also has challenges. America has the largest number of prisoners in the world, percentage-wise. America does have violence. America has isolation. America has drug problem. So I think every country is different in many ways and similar in many ways. So India really needs to learn the best from everywhere we can. What is our strength according to me? Is young talent. How do we use it is up to us.
Yes.
This young talent is the only workforce for the world, not just India. We are blessed with great soil and great weather. Many years ago, I had a conversation with a Chinese, and this Chinese professor said, Mr. Pitroda, the biggest difference between India and China is Ganga and Yellow River. I said, what do you mean? He said, look, our Yellow River is such that we have to clean every year. If we don't clean it properly, mud comes in and we can't grow anything. You are blessed that no matter what you do, Ganga is such, everything grows around it. So you don't have to work hard. The message was, we are blessed with climate and we could be the food basket for the world if we want. Look at the variety we have. Look at the diversity we have. Diversity in genetic pool, diversity in flora and fauna. We have 8,000 herbal medicinal plants which are unique to Indian climate. Okay. These plants don't grow anywhere else. How many countries can say that? This is a country where everybody came from all over the world and settled and made their home. Okay, it doesn't matter who it was. This is a country which never went out acquiring anybody. So we are unique and we must design our own destiny. But it cannot be in isolation. It has to be part of the global community. India has to promote diversity. India has to promote democracy. India has to promote human rights. India has to promote decentralization. All the things that Gandhiji talked about were so very fundamental. And that's why I worry about India when the idea of India is being challenged. Okay. I have nothing against anybody. But I have problem when you begin to challenge the idea of India. And India must prepare a blueprint where everybody is treated equally. We have this problem with untouchables. I mean, how can you do that in 2020? This is unthinkable. Okay. So we know what the challenges are. I wouldn't compare with US. I would look at first our challenge. And I would not worry about what is our GDP, GNP, fine, it's good. But I would worry about how do we keep our people happy, healthy, educated, fulfilled, engaged. Those are more important than some of the parameters that we sort of chase.
Thanks, Sam. That's a great cue for the next set of questions, and I must thank Ghazala and Sajid for asking this question to somebody who has worked on this issue for several years now. As part of your digital empowerment vision, Sam, one of the things you have stressed is how education can be demonetized and education can reach to the marginalized. Now, the questions that these people are asking are that given the level of marginalization and the penury that a lot of our students live in remote areas, is there any hope for them in this post-COVID technological hyper-connected world? How do we get across to those who are really beyond the digital divide?
First of all, we may not be able to solve all the problems all the time.
Yeah.
It is not about digital divide. It is about divide everywhere. It's about divide in water, divide in education, divide in health service, divide in transport, divide in food, divide in nutrition. Okay?
Yes, yes.
So don't expect us to solve all problems at the same time. But I would say one thing. If every young, no matter where they are, can be given access to this, they will educate themselves.
Wonderful.
Don't try to run their life. Just give it to them, turn them loose. Children are smarter than you think. We all have 5-year-old kids who know how to push buttons and do things that you and I can't do. Okay? Let them explore their own world on this. And don't constrain them to follow our world. Our world is obsolete. But you got to give them the tools. Of course, you got to connect them. Of course, you got to, empower them. If you can't do that, then they'll be left behind, unfortunately. There is no way out. Okay. Next.
So, yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So the next the set of questions that are being asked is that given the fact that post-COVID, there is a sense of alienation against China, the world is a little, upset with China. And will that lead to some kind of a trade diversion towards India? Will India be benefited by a new supply chain, a new value chain that will emerge post-COVID? And if that is the case, then what is it that we should be doing?
Look, I don't think India can be built based on export and new supply chain. India has to be built within.
Wonderful.
India is not about increasing export. India is not about creating more billionaires. India is not about, saying we are better than China.
Yes.
Okay. India is about what we need to do for people at the bottom of the economic pyramid. Of course, we can create more jobs in export. I'm not against that. But are we ready? When I look at the complexity of starting a business in India, I would say, why would anybody come? It's difficult. Okay, we got to simplify. We got to put our house in order. If we can't put our house in order, how do we expect other people to support us? Okay. I must tell you, recently I had to open a bank account. I never had a bank account in India because I never got any salary in India. But, so finally I had to open a bank account last 2 months ago because my father left a house in Orissa on my name, and that house was built 80 years ago. And no one has visited that house for 30 years in the family because family is here.
Yeah.
So finally I decided to sell it. Okay. And I got some money. Now I need to transfer that money and I have to open a bank account. The amount of hassle I have gone through in opening a bank account at Indian Bank, I said, why would anybody open a bank account, right? You know, I mean, you want this and you want that and you want this and 3 copies of that and 5 copies of this. And it's obscene because you basically say, I don't trust you. I don't trust you that you are Sam Pitroda. I don't trust that your father gave you the house. I don't trust you it is your house, even though there is all the documents. Okay. I mean, the whole thing is based on mistrust as opposed to trust. And Gandhiji talked about trust. So I think we have a long way to go. And I would say, don't get too excited. It'll be nice if we get all that opportunity, but let's put our house in order. Okay. And don't toot your horn by saying we are making more smartphones now. Don't mean anything according to me. Okay. Because the value addition is very little. We don't have power infrastructure. We don't have water infrastructure. We don't have, distribution and delivery infrastructure in place. We don't have logistic infrastructure. Put all that in place and the world will look at you differently.
Wonderful, sir. So forthright and so clear in what you say. I'm going to touch upon a question that Manohar has asked, and Manohar wants to know that, and this is a pure technology question, and that is why it is being asked to you, that, China seems to be coming up with all these applications all the time, TikTok and whatever, and we seem to be banning them. Why can't we do it? I mean, how do we ensure that in the software sector itself, we are able to do what Nabiha is also asking? How do we ensure that our small businesses, our medium scale enterprises in software and otherwise are able to compete with other countries and provide solutions within India that we are now importing?
Because our software industry is based on software services. Our software industry was designed to solve the problem of the Citibank in America and not State Bank of India. It's that simple. Okay. We took our manpower, used that labor to solve somebody else's problem and build businesses based on arbitrage. I charge them $100,000, I pay my guy $50,000 and I pocket $50,000 as an example, which is okay, fine, good. Nothing wrong with it. It created $200 billion export a year. But in the process, we did not pay attention to solving our own problems. See, innovation comes from solving your own problems. If you solve somebody else's problem, they have solved the problem they want you to implement. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you begin to solve the problems of India originally with your own capabilities, then you will come up with products. Today you are not close to the market because market is outside. In China, they created their own market by prohibiting other multinationals to have access to their market. Huawei did not exist when we started C-Dot. Okay. C-Dot could have been much bigger than Huawei if we had given all market access. But when it comes to buying, we prefer to buy from multinationals. And as a result, local industries don't begin to grow. So China has been very clever in controlling their markets, forcing multinationals to come in and do technology transfer, and not allowing them access to their market. We didn't do that. Look at telecom. We were way ahead in local production in 1980s. And then in 90s, when we got into mobile telephony, we decided to import lock, stock and barrel, and that killed completely local telecom industry, manufacturing. So it has to do with government policies and pressure from, local businessmen and all kinds of issues. It's a very complex issue.
Indeed, Sam, indeed. And therefore, this takes me to another issue that I must thank Shoma Das for highlighting. And Shoma is asking you this question again. Your insight will be very important here. That yes, hyper connectivity and technology has given us several solutions and provided us several answers. But hasn't it also given a disturbing amount of emotional disconnectedness? Hasn't it also made us feel a new divide between the technological haves and have-nots? And therefore, don't you think that those who have access to this technology and its tools are in some way now the new upper caste? Is that something that worries you?
No, it does not worry me at all. Okay. Whenever there is something new, there is a divide.
Mm-hmm.
When television was introduced, you could say, well, these people have television, I don't have television. When cell phone was introduced, you could say, oh, those people have cell phone, I don't have cell phone. That process continues. Every time there is a new invention, it disturbs or disrupts existing equation. I'll give you two examples. When sewing machine was invented, everybody thought, oh my God, what will happen to all the people who are in sewing business? When automatic dialing was invented, in America, all telephone operators went on strike, saying you are making every human being an operator.
Yes.
Because our jobs are gone.
Yeah.
If we had listened to them then, every human being today in the world would be a telephone operator. You see what I'm saying? So
Yes.
whenever there is new technology, there is disturbance. And ultimately it percolates down. It doesn't percolate down in the beginning. When electricity was introduced, people said, oh, there is a divide. Those people have a light bulb, I don't have a light bulb. Of course, that's true. It takes time. So it depends on how you look at the world. Is the glass half empty or half full? If you're used to looking at glass as half empty, you'll always find it half empty. Perfectly all right. Nothing wrong with it. You make your choice. And technology is a tool. It's like a knife. Knife also cuts tomato and it kills somebody.
Yeah.
Just because it kills somebody, you can't say, I won't use knife to cut tomato. Some will misuse, some will abuse, but the use will be important.
Sam, how do we then fight fake news and hate? There is so much of hate in this world.
That's a very important question. Okay. See, basic problem is business model by social media. So if I'm a social media company, my value gets determined by how many people have signed up.
Yeah.
And how many clicks you make, because my revenue depends on the clicks and number of people signed up. So I encourage Sam Pitroda to sign up 5 times. Sam Pitroda 1, Sam Pitroda 2, Joe Blow,
Yes.
Amir Khan, okay? And now, rather than 1 million users, I have 5 million users.
Yeah.
Then I tell Sam Pitroda that more clicks you generate, better off it is for me. So today, Dr. Amir decides that he's going to tweet that while talking on the, while talking to us, Sam Pitroda collapsed and died. Just that will create all kinds of news and clicks and everybody.
Right.
Then you will come back 2 days from now and say, but Sam Pitroda was my dog. It will generate another 10 million clicks. Okay. So the basic problem today on social media is unauthenticated behavior. So when I do something, there'll be tweets from all over the people, saying, oh, they're bad, Sam is bad, Sam doesn't know. I don't read. I don't care. I don't care what they say. I never read it. My job is to do this, and then what somebody says is their job. Okay, you can criticize me, you can abuse me, that's okay, that's your right. Okay, if you like that, do it, do more of it.
Yes.
But if you have to authenticate yourself, saying, I am Sam Pitroda, I take responsibility for what I speak. On this social media, I'm the real guy. I exist. I have a family, I have children, I have a job, and I take responsibility. Most of the people who shout on social media are unauthenticated. Understand that?
Yes.
So when somebody says, I'm Ramesh criticizing Sam Pitroda, he's not Ramesh. He's nobody. He doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But he has signed up as a Ramesh account. So don't pay attention to it. Just ignore it. That's what I do. So that is the problem. Okay? Because you can have 5,000 people paid saying as soon as Sam Pitroda speaks on this attack.
Yes.
Say he's anti-national, say he's, bad. Why did he do this? Why does he keep long hair? Why is his beard black? All this stuff. You can do anything.
Right.
Okay, so that's okay. So ignore them. What can you do? You can't help that.
Sam, in extension to that, we are one of the few countries in the world, actually one of the many countries in the world, which often resort to suspending internet connections, to suspending SMS services. Every time there is some flare up somewhere, the first thing we do is cut 3G, cut 4G. How's that? How do you see that as a policy measure? I mean, it is done with keeping security in mind. Yes.
That is a sign of authoritarian attitude. It is antithesis to hyperconnectivity. Hyperconnectivity is about democratization, decentralization, openness. You see, hyperconnectivity brings about openness, accessibility, connectivity, networking, democratization, decentralization.
Yes.
So when you do anything like blocking it, you are saying, I'm afraid. I want to control. I think things are getting out of control. Okay, so you block it, which is not the right thing to do in the long run. In the long run, you need debate, communication. You see, all organizational architecture today are predominantly designed based on command and control. You need new organizational architecture which are designed based on collaboration,
yes,
cooperation, and co-creation.
yes.
We don't understand co-creation. We got to create solutions together. Solution cannot be created by me for you. Okay? You got to be party to that solution creation. And if there is no communication, you cannot co-create. So the organizational architecture of tomorrow has to be collaboration, cooperation, communication, and co-creation. People don't know how to do that. People don't know how to do that.
Okay. Wonderful, Sam. That you put in so well. So therefore, I mean, I know that we are taxing you and you have already taken a lot of time.
That's okay, no problem.
I bring to you the last question for now. There are several that I haven't asked, and I must ask people to bear with us. We've already taken nearly 120 minutes of Sam's time. But Sam, the question, actually, this is speaking to you as somebody who has provided us a solution after solution. What we want to hear from you is how do we tackle the issue of the post-COVID or the post-vaccine development phase? Your views on how hyperconnectivity, how tracking, tracing, and modern technology will help us reach the vaccine to all Indians. You know, there is this debate now, you must have seen that, you know, some political heads have promised some people vaccines and not other people. Even in the US election campaign, the vaccination is an issue. But we want to vaccinate everybody. Like we vaccinated everybody of polio, we want to vaccinate everybody with COVID. How do we do this? You know, to vaccinate 1.5 billion people is going to take time and cost. What is your technological solution? How will hyperconnectivity help us?
Hyperconnectivity has helped us a lot in COVID-19 crisis world over.
Yes.
If we didn't have hyperconnectivity, we would have gone crazy. Because of hyperconnectivity, you and I can talk.
Yes.
I can talk to my grandchildren. I'm okay locked up in a house because I have interactivity with people. I can see their body language. I can see their face. I can talk to them.
Yeah.
And it's all free. Look at that. Can you imagine what would it cost to have this call for 90 minutes?
Correct.
With hundreds of people?
Yeah.
We won't be able to afford to do it. And we would say, okay, we can't do it. So hyperconnectivity has helped us a lot in COVID-19.
Yeah.
In addition, hyperconnectivity has helped us in isolating cases. Who is connected to whom?
Yes.
Where did you go? What did you do? When did you travel? Okay, so you have a huge ability to trace certain things with hyperconnectivity. Okay. And there are software packages coming now for traceability and isolation and all that. But vaccine is still a long way. It's not there.
No.
Everybody says next week, next month, before election, Trump said, not happening. Until it has happened, I won't count on it. I always plan for the worst and hope for the best. I do not plan for the best and wind up with the worst. Okay. When people tell me, look, I got bad news and good news, I would say, tell me the bad news first.
Yes.
Okay. All the difficult work, I do it in the morning and not leave it till evening. Okay. It's a way of doing things. So when vaccine is available, which is tested, validated, approved, proved, then comes the difficult part. And that is to produce in large volume, deliver, distribute, or first distribute and then deliver. And then you got to decide who will get first.
Yes. Yes.
Will older people get? So logically what should happen is first you should give it to all health workers.
Wonderful. Yes.
They should be protected first.
Yes.
They have their life online. Okay, they deserve first protection. Second protection should be all the police, security worker, because they are in public.
Yeah.
They are also protecting all of us. They are taking risk in going out and doing things.
Yeah.
So it is our moral responsibility to protect them first. Third would be older people. Fourth would be weaker people who have some, problem here, some problem there. Okay. Then hotspots. So it's very logical, it's not rocket science. Okay. But you can't take vaccine and give it to rich people first. Okay, you can't do that. You got to give it to health workers first. You got to take care of police and protection agencies and all of them. Because they have sacrificed. They are exposed. And they deserve first attention. That's how I would do it.
Wonderful, Sam. Wonderful. Thanks. It's such a neat chronology that you have drawn, which is ethical, moral, and efficient. So I think that's the answer that most people who are looking for inputs on this question would appreciate. I have a host of other questions, Sam, some which are not really within the context of today's talk, though I'm sure you are the expert who will answer those questions too. Like, what will happen if Joe Biden wins the US election? Will it change things for India? What is going, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that is a question that has been asked. And how does that matter to India politically, economically? How will the US election matter to India?
First of all, let me tell all our friends that India is not a very large part of American equation, no matter
Right.
what you say.
Right.
Okay, let's not get too excited. Okay. We think India is at the center of the world, which is
Yeah.
not true. Because there is something very simple called golden rule. One who has gold makes the rule.
True.
India does not have gold yet to make the rule.
Right.
China has enough gold to interfere in the rule. US has the gold to make the rule. Okay? So India does not figure in much. Of course, everybody gives lip service. We want to be friends with India, democracy, all that stuff. That's okay. But if you look at the bottom line, it doesn't mean a thing. Let's accept it. And don't say, oh, we are a great global superpower. We are not superpower. If you can't take care of, 300 million people at the bottom of the economic pyramid, how can you be superpower? By?
Very true.
So don't have these grandiose old ideas in your mind. You look at American newspapers and see if there's any news on India. Never. Anything. But in India, it's blown like we are a great, important player in American politics. No, Indians living here maybe. That's a separate issue.
Yes.
Okay. But they are Americans. They look like Indians, but so what? No, they don't think like Indians.
Thank you so much, Sam. You were always so straightforward and never called a spade anything but a spade. So thanks so much. That is so humbling and that is so true. And I hope that,
But I can tell you, if Democrats win here,
sir,
it will have a domino effect world over.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Psychologically, people will say that democracy is important.
Yeah.
Okay. Those who are sort of trying to control.
Yeah.
Okay. With populist background will be seen in different light.
Wonderful. Yes. So that, in some sense answers Aftab Alam's question also, that social media, while it is being used very much by the right wing and the hyper nationalists, is as good a weapon with those who are fighting for democracy and for freedom. That's what Sam has been saying all along. And that example that he used of the knife being used to cut tomatoes and cut people's veins. So that is where we are. It's wonderful that we've heard something so straightforward, so crystal clear, and with such enormous vision that I now want to, towards the end of this session, I want to bring in two people here who have been the architects of this program today. The first one that I want to bring in is Dr. Manzoor Alam. Dr. Manzoor Alam is a renowned economist who has worked and built one of the finest research institutions in the country, called the Institute of Objective Studies, which is the host for this program. I learn a lot from him on a daily basis. But Dr. Manzoor Alam, I know you are not well. Thanks for being with us through the program. We all pray for your good health. If we could have your views, we are always very interested in hearing what you have to say. Over to you, Professor Alam.
Thank you, Amir.
Thank you very much, Amir Sahab, Amirullah Khan Sahab. Really, I am very thankful to Sam Patroda ji. Have been learning, listening, and also reading so many articles and so many his things that has always enriched me. Sir, you had given a very good talk about the third vision, which is the need of the time. In the two things are very concerned, as you said very clearly, that planet and the people. In developing the third vision, there is a huge misconception and behavior and attitude of the people as a whole, that people, to my mind, people are honorable creature from the nature, by God, by whatever, Allah, whatever the nomenclature one can use. So that is the honorable creature. It is necessary for honorable creature to develop the education in the line which we are saying, and in the line of all the diversity and democratization, etc., etc. These are the very important aspects. But the problem which the whole planet is facing, that is the humane aspect of development. All the development which is taking place, it is not as a humane aspect. People are talking about the humanity. People are talking about the dignity of humanity. But things are not developing as humane aspects. My sound is reaching to you, sir?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Very clearly, very clearly. Yeah.
So this is the one of the aspects. Secondly, also, when the global aspect of the constitution, including our constitution of India, talking about equality, fraternity, it is under the huge challenge all over the world. So how this hyper connectivity are going to resolve it? How we can think of to make a part of agenda as an honorable creature of humanity, and that honorable creature cannot stand unless there is a democratization of education, new system of economy, etc. All the aspects which are concerned, these are the very big challenges before the hyper connectivity, and this must be taken from the humane aspect. Otherwise, dominated always will be dominating. Discrimination will always be increasing. Social distance, social social will be social distinction will be part of so many issues and problems, including in America, black and white, and India, so many things are together. So these are the very humane aspect, is really a big challenge that has to be addressed properly, and that we must see how we can develop third vision, as you said, in the light which you have already given some other things. Thank you very much indeed. Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahbubul Alam. It's nice to see you there. You look good, and I hope that that you're taking good care of yourself. All our prayers are with you. We would like to see you fit and fine quickly. Professor Dr. Z.M. Khan is Secretary General of the Institute of Objective Studies. May I request Professor Khan to give his address?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me at the outset express my appreciation and gratitude to Mr. Petrola that he has given a new vision to the whole situation in which we are placed. Challenges are many, and these challenges have to be worked out, has to be fought out, and has to be conquered in a way. I'll be definitely waiting for his book entitled New Design, which will give a vision of the new world. Because my problem at this moment is that we have got an entrenched state system which is working against all ideals which we are aspiring for. And this state system has really become so strong and powerful that common man is really struggling very hard even to survive in this country. So, I mean, such kind of a big challenge, how to conquer this, how to uproot this, how to do all this. And one of the major drawbacks with us is that our people are swayed by propaganda, are swayed by managed propaganda, and so on and so forth. And that is why the democracy in India is being misused totally by vested interest to the extent of exploitation. Second part of my concern is that the role of NGOs should be strengthened, because NGOs can occupy a very important segment and very important space. Institute of Objective Studies is trying its level best to come up to the occasion and to do its best. And to give an example to that, we have come out with 9 important books on empowerment of different sections of Indian community, like empowerment of women, educational empowerment, political empowerment, and so on. And I would love, and we will work it out with you, sir, about having certain activity in the Middle East and in Dubai and all these areas. That will be really good help in terms of exploring this new area and through a new instrument, that is the NGO. Our NGO is non-political, as every one of us knows, and we are struggling hard to concentrate upon the problems of marginalized sections of Indian society. Marginalized sections of Indian society are in a terrible situation. We are talking about rights, we are talking about privileges, we are talking about designs, and they are struggling for surviving for their physical, existence. So this way, I think we in India are in a very, very bad shape, and that part of population is not in thousands, in lakhs. It is in crores, and this is a very big area that has to be tackled with. Secondly, the heterogeneity of this country. The heterogeneity of this country also adds to the problem, and the regional problems differ from one place to another, and that has to be looked into. That is why, Institute of Objective Studies has actually established 5 chapters in all parts of India, like, South India, like western part of it, like eastern part of it, and we people are collaborating on the problem, studying the problems of the local people and local needs and so on. So my submission is that we need in this whole regard your help, and you have assured us. Thank you so much for this, and we will really work it out in collaboration with all like-minded people all around to have got this thing. We will try to play our role as an NGO and to do our bit in connecting people and trying to popularize democratization, decentralization, and demonetization, as you have prescribed very well. So democracy is very basic to our system also, sir. It's part of our culture. That culture has to be revived in terms of giving new idea to the problems and solutions of this age. We are really thankful to you, and we are looking forward for much more cooperation and help from your side to the institution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan. Thank you so much, Professor Manzoor Alam. And I must, before I go to Sam, thank all of you wonderful audience who have been with us through this while, asked some very important questions. And I'm sure you are with me in thanking Sam for not only having given a great talk, but in having answered every question with the clarity and the precision that he is known for. To Sam Pitroda, from all of us, wishing you all positivity, wish you remain negative, and that you live, use your time at home to write for us a couple of books more, because we are all going to read them and benefit from what you say. Thanks for accepting our invitation, for getting up for us early and coming on and giving this really wonderful talk. We will treasure this for a long, long time to come. And all that Dr. Khan has said as a way of follow-up, that we at IOS wish to take up, we will indeed do so, and will lean on to you for your mentorship and your help. I know that you never refuse Dr. Manzoor Alam, and that you will not do so in the future. To all of you, please do take care. We are still seeing the epidemic and the pandemic go strong. Thanks for joining us again today. On behalf of the Institute of Objective Studies, may I now request Mohammad Alam to close the session. Thank you very much, and good night, and good morning to you, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Can I ask Mohammad Alam to close the meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are closing the session. Thank you.
Thanks. Very well done.
Thank
Alam.
you.
Very, very well done. We had such a fantastic session thanks to your logistics.
Remain in touch. Be in touch.
Thank you,
How
sir.
many people were there?
That's
How
a
many
promise.
people were connected?
Sir, at the when we were at the peak, we had about 100 on the Zoom, and we had a couple of hundred on YouTube. So we had broadcasted live simultaneously, and we will leave this recording for others to see. Thank you so much again.
And you might want to take some clips out of this.
We will do that.
Yeah, yeah.
We will
will
edit
do,
these.
and we'll send you all the things. And
Yes,
we
just-
will be in contact for your mentorship.
Let me know if I can be of any help on the other things. I'll be happy to work with you. Okay.
Wonderful.
Take care of
Thank
your
you.
health.
So nice.
Dr. Alam, I didn't know you were
Your
not well.
mentorship is needed. Your mentorship is needed
You don't
as
need
well as
mentorship,
your. No.
You do not need mentorship. We need to collaborate.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
that's what we
Wonderful.
call. You know, one of the landmark of Institute of Objective Studies: sit together, think together, work together. These are the three togetherness.
I see so many
So
books
that
in the
is a-
back of you.
Yes.
I see all these books in the back of you. So
Yeah.
I'm sure
That's
we have a lot
right.
of things to discuss.
You know.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank
Good
you very
night,
much.
sir.
We will be
Thank
in
you so
contact.
much,
We
sir.
will be in contact.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.